Welcome, everyone. My name is Charlene Margot, and I am co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture. Delighted to have with us tonight Isabelle C. We'll be talking with you about her new book, Love to Learn. Welcome, Isabelle.
Oh, thank you, Charlene, for having me. Thank you, Bev, and thank you, Louise, for handling the translation as well. Such a pleasure to be with all of you. And thank you to also all the parents who are joining on a Monday late afternoon at the time of the year where all of us parents are so busy with year-end and graduation. If for those families who have a child who is graduating, or year-end shows and all these things. So very busy times for all of us parents. So really grateful for all of you to be joining this session. Before we even get started, I would love actually to understand who is with us. So if you wouldn't mind just putting in the chat where you are located and also the age of your child or your children, that would be great. Just so that I understand who is with us. And I will give everyone a moment to share. So let me maybe share first a little bit about why I wrote this book, Love to Learn. And simply, this book relates a very deeply personal story. Simply because early childhood education quite literally changed the trajectory of my very own life. So that's a pictures when I was around 3 years old. And at that age, I was late everything. So I was a late walker, a late talker. And so my parents decided to have me take one of those psychological evaluations. And the test came back and said that I had low academic aptitude. So not exactly the type of messages that parents want to hear, obviously, at age 3. So, but instead of panicking, they responded with something quite powerful. They responded with a lot of love. And they did something that at the time, I'm not even sure that they realized would be quite transformational. They enrolled me in a beautiful early childhood program, one where I was deeply nurtured, supported, and seen. And that simple act, I believe, transformed the trajectory of my life. I would end up years later graduating from Harvard University. So this low academic aptitude is very much in my past and behind me at this point. But this deeply personal experience highlighted for me the importance of investing in early childhood education and the transformational impact we can have both individually and societally in investing in the early years. And looking back, it was not just the education itself that mattered, it was the relationships. So certainly starting with the care of my parents, as I mentioned already, as well as the warmth of my early childhood educators and teachers later on, but especially 2 early childhood educators that I speak at length in the book that really made a profound difference for me. And so that's why I wrote Love to Learn, because I believe in something simple and profound, that if we want to unlock human potential, we must start with relationships. Which maybe gets me to maybe a question for all of you. And if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit more about all of you, if you could put in the chat, maybe thinking about a person or several people who had similar impacts on your own education trajectories. So again, for me, this was my parents and my 2 early childhood educators. Who was it in your own life that made a huge difference in your education? And Charlene, I will maybe, because I'm in full mode, so I will maybe rely on you to, oh no, I can see here the chat. Uh, your mom, yeah, thank you. My parents, yeah, yeah. So very similar to me. Oh, Miss Mitchell, first grade, nice. My first grade teacher was playful and helped me at ease. Oh, nice. Yeah. Anyone who had a special coach or, for example, right now, when I think about my daughters, they both have an exceptional music teacher who has been with them for several years. This older, 80 plus year old woman who is an exceptional music teacher and whom we love as a family. So I think this woman actually has made such a difference in my children's lives. Anyone here who is thinking about other relationships? And both are great. Thank you for sharing. Um, And so this topic feels obviously almost timeless and timely. Um, and I spend a lot of time in my current role at Stanford University studying artificial intelligence. And I believe in so many ways that we are at a turning point. As my very good friend and contact at LinkedIn's chief economist has said, the future of work is not just digital or relational or technical, it is relational. And I strongly believe that we are actually entering what he calls, but what I also really like referring to as a relational economy, where our ability to connect and to collaborate and to care for others is becoming the most valuable currency we all have. So not only this concept of relationships has always been important, I think it's only there to grow in its importance, which is why I wanted to start with this big theme. So today I want to explore three different areas. One is of science, because I sit in research, and of course I want to always start with the science of relationships. Then we'll go into the current crisis of connection and what I perceive to be a huge issue currently in our societies. And then we'll explore some more hopeful stories of solutions where we can all together build a bold relationship-centered vision for our future of learning. But let me turn to the science first. So I like to say that we are all born billionaires, not necessarily in dollar terms, but certainly in number of neurons in our brains. We are all born as human babies with about 100 billion neurons. But those neurons by themselves are not enough. What matters is how those neurons connect with each other, what scientists call synaptic connections. And those synaptic connections are built moment by moment, interaction by interaction through human relationships. In fact, 90% of our brains as humans develop before the age of 5. And it's not metaphorically, it's actually quite biologically. And the brain is never more plastic and more ready to be shaped, ready to learn than in those early years. So what wires the brain is what my dear colleague at Harvard University, Jacques Shonkoff, calls serve and return interactions. You know, those little moments like this father, a nice sight with his daughter here on this picture, or sometimes a touch or laughter, all those very special moments of human connections, the safety, the love, the presence between all of us humans. And we know this matters from many studies, but one that I'm absolutely obsessed about is this one, and it's actually quite heartbreaking in many ways, which are studies that were done in Romanian orphanages. The reason why I'm so obsessed about that particular setting is that for many, maybe obvious reasons, it is really, really difficult, if not impossible and not ethical, to study relational deprivation, the lack of love and the lack of nurturing relationships in humans at scale. So that particular setting of the Romanian orphanages gave us this quite unique and sobering setting where many researchers have been able to study that exact situation of relational deprivation. Anywhere between 100,000 to the latest estimates of 500,000 little ones were abandoned in those Romanian orphanages. So we are speaking about scale of little ones who were raised in extreme neglect. And even for those young children who were fed and clothed, they lacked one thing, which is nurturing relationships. So the result from the research is quite clear. As you can see here on the left-hand side, which is a study of the brain size, the brain volume, the brains were physically smaller for those children who were raised in those Romanian orphanages relative to those children who were lucky enough to be adopted in families in the US or in Canada or in the UK. And the longer a child stayed in those Romanian orphanages deprived from love, the smaller the brain was. So you can see there is almost like a correlation between the length of stay, with the little dots here, and the size of the brain. And then on the right-hand side, it shows a similar picture looking at brain activity, which is also meaningfully reduced for those children who were raised in those orphanages. Studies also have shown that those children had severe development delays and long-term emotional challenges. So what was missing for those children was not food, it was love. And we see it also in more hopeful studies. So here it's a study from a colleague and child psychiatrist at Washington University who found that the size of a child's hippocampus, the hippocampus, as many of you will know, is a front part of our brain, which is the area that's responsible for memory and a lot of our learning, varied significantly based on how nurturing a primary caregiver is. The study was mostly done with mothers, but I think that the conclusion of the research was that it would be applicable to dads as well, and showed that the hippocampus size was 10% larger for children with high parental support. So very similar conclusion as, in a positive way as the Romanian orphanage studies. And it's not just brain development. Relationships also predict in many ways success in schools and beyond. So here it's a set of research from the Search Institute for high school students at scale. We studied about a group of 20,000 students and observed that the number of strong relationships a high schooler has, which you can see here on each one of those graphs, is from 0 to 5. Then there are some really positive things that happen, including increased academic motivation, increased social emotional skills, and so forth. So relationships also matter for academic success. It also matters for joy and well-being. So here it's one of my colleagues, Casper Ademan, who I believe has literally the best job on earth. he studies baby laughter, which actually, if you think about it, is a really interesting area of studies. But one, I'm just like, wow, I would love to study baby laughter. Anyway, so he has observed, so he has looked at children between 2.5 and 4 and put those little ones into 3 groups. One was by themselves, one was with another little one, and then the third group was in small groups. And what he has observed is that the mere presence of at least one peer increases the laughter, the occurrence of laughter by 8 times. So in other terms, relationships matter for all of us humans for joy and well-being. So this is actually my favorite slide. It's a summarizing slide. It's not the prettier slides, but it's my favorite one. First, because I quote one of my heroes, James Comer, who I know is also Bev's heroes here, because she was actually just giving me that quote right before we started this conversation. And he said, relationships are to a child development what location is to real estate. We need relationships, relationships, relationships. It's Bev and my favorite quote here. And then another quote that I love from that is much more recent than the first one, from my dear friend Michael Levine, who says ITRS, which stands for It is relationships, stupid. I love those 2 quotes. But just to summarize what we just discussed, relationships matter for brain development. They matter for learning. They drive lifelong success. They also, this is one of the cutting edge of research right now on relationships. They seem to also have an effect on peak performance in athletes. For example, there are some really interesting studies on what makes a difference between a gold medalist and a silver medalist in swimming. And apparently a lot of the evidence seems to suggest that it's our ability to connect to someone that we love. So there seems to be some impact of relationships on peak performance. And by the way, we have known for a very long time that for top athletes or top executives in many different fields, that having a coach is a driver of peak performance. So this element of really having close relationships, close human relationships, is often associated with peak performance. Relationships also drive resilience. They drive happiness and well-being, as we saw from the baby laughter study. And then if you needed one more area of evidence, relationships also drive better health and longevity. So there is a very famous Harvard study on showing that, especially in older age groups, having a tight group of friends, and here quality matters more than quantity, but drives longer lives and make us live longer. So that's a little bit of a whirlwind around like the science of relationships, but by the way keeps continuing improving on many levels and building on this decades of research. But here is what is the issue at hand is despite all we know, we continue to treat relationships as, for the most part, invisible in our systems of learning. And not only invisible in some ways, they are actually, this crisis of relationships is actually deepening. And we may not even recognize that it's actually worsening as we speak. So, which is why I wrote this book in the first place. And I had one of those haha moments which accelerated the writing of this book. I had, this was an experience right at the onset of the pandemic, where I had the opportunity to discuss with one of my colleagues at Columbia University, a dear colleague of mine named Danny Dumitriou, who was studying newborns during COVID at this very large hospital in New York City called Morgan Stanley Hospital. And she shared those data that you see here on this little graph, that only 20% of the babies that she was observing at that time had a strong emotional connection in their earliest days. Or said differently, 80% of young children didn't have a strong emotional connection with their closed ones, especially their mother. And I was like, okay, well, maybe this is because we are at the onset of the pandemic, at a time of heightened stress, especially in New York City. You may all remember that New York City was, the center of our crisis at the time, and so we were all watching what was going on in New York City. So, in a way, maybe it was one point of time. But when she shared this pre-pandemic control data here, that you can see this little gray area here on this graph, where only 40% of young children had a strong emotional bond, or said more negatively, 60% of young children didn't. And that particular stat really concerned me deeply, because that was not a pandemic problem. That is our baseline. Our baseline is a majority of our young children, when they are born, are not emotionally connected with their parents. And I had done a lot of work in early childhood for years and years. I didn't realize we were at that level of concern, which led me to write more and study more and examine more what was going on. As a result, knowing all this science, and then realizing how big the problem was. And we often hear, obviously, we all know this tagline of this African adage that says, it takes a village to raise a child. But in fact, the networks of connections around our children are actually shrinking. So starting obviously with families getting smaller, especially we all know about fertility declines. So that means in concrete terms that a lot of our children are raised in smaller and smaller families. We had a family with 5 children, that's rare. Many families now have actually a growing number of families only have 1 child. It's about 20% of all families only have 1 child now. And that number has meaningfully increased over the past few years. Grandparents also often live further and further away. This is definitely the case in my family. One stat on older adults that surprised me in my research is the one that I outlined here in this little graph, with a lot of the little people represented here on this graph, which is that only 3% of children have ever met an adult above age 65 who is not a family member. So clearly we live in age-segregated societies where our little ones are not meeting with older adults anymore. Play is also receding and has been replaced steadily by structured activities. We can discuss this more in our Q&A, hopefully. And then last but not least, screens and technologies are interfering with human relationships. So on that front, while parents are spending more and more time physically with their little ones, so in many ways we as parents are more present in our children's lives, we are also in many ways, and that's an area that we all need to watch out for, more emotionally absent because of technology. So you can do this after our conversation, but you can easily check on your device how many times in the past few days you have picked up your device The American average for any adult in the US is now 205 times per day. My average is a little higher, may I admit. So I'm not pointing any fingers to anyone here, but that means in concrete terms that there are 200 or more opportunities every day to have those technologies interfere with a beautiful playtime or discussion with a child or any other activities with a child. So all of us as adults, whether we are parents, grandparents, aunties, educators, we need to be really, really mindful of how technology interferes with our relationships with children. And it's not only the adults, obviously children too, but I feel like the discourse on screen time for children is much more prevalent. One stat that I highlighted here is one that just was published last month by our amazing organization Common Sense Media, where 40% of children under 2 now have their own device. And then on the right, I highlighted something that I spend a lot of time in the book speaking about, which is the difference between what I call junk tech and relational tech. So technology by itself can be a good thing or a bad thing. It's a tool. It's whatever we make out of it. It's just really up to us to decide which technology, how positive or not we want this technology to be. The complicated thing for all of us parents, and I would say also educators, is that a lot of the technology out there is actually not relational, is not augmenting human connections. My very dear colleague, Kathy Hirsch-Basek, and you see here the study that I quoted here at the bottom of the image on the right, has done this study analyzing all education, variety of education tools for young children, and has shown that 90% of those tools currently are more in the junk tech category as opposed to relational tech. So all of us parents or educators, we really need to be mindful about what technologies our children, not only the time, but also what type of tools our children and all of us are using. So as a result of this, we are seeing two very interesting phenomena. One is, which I attribute to this decline in relationships. One, we are seeing IQ scores falling. So the IQ had been steadily rising for the past 150 years since this IQ test had been invented. And then over the past few years, it actually has started to reverse. And one of the big hypotheses that I have is because of this shrinking circles of relationships. The fact that we are more lonely is contradictory to the fact that we have social brains, that we are wired for connections. And the right-hand side, some of you may have seen this. This was published just a few weeks ago in the Financial Times and was widely published by Jonathan Haidt. It's a survey of 18 years old in the US that shows a meaningful and concerning decline as reported by our young adults in difficulty thinking, concentrating, or learning new things. And as you can see on those two graphs, it seems like really the past 10 years, since 2015 or so, there seems to be a material deterioration of some of those self-reported difficulties and troubles, which again I attribute to a large extent to the fact that our teens and all of us adults, but also our children, are increasingly more isolated and lonely. And now we have AI, and we had AI to the mix. So at the same time that human relationships are shrinking, machine relationships seem to be rising. And that's not a surprise. That's not a coincidence. I think we are all wired for connections. So it's almost as if machines were to, fill this void that we have as humans to connect. So you can see here, and this is obviously for studies for surveys and studies for adults, not for children, but that the number one use case of generative AI currently in 2025, according to a recent Harvard Business Review survey, is therapy/companionship. So this category of this category of machine relationships is rapidly rising. We have now it's estimated that there are about 1 billion people on this planet that are using these AI companions, or what my Stanford researchers colleagues are calling intelligent social agents. About 750 million are in China. There's this widely used platform called Xiaoqie that many Chinese young adults are using. And then in the US, those are platforms like Replika.ai, which is represented here, or Character.ai is another very popular platform. So it's a fast rising category that I'm raising here, and that may be of interest to many of you on this call, given the age groups that your children are in, because a lot of young adults, but also high schoolers and some middle schoolers have been using those platforms. By the way, before I get into the research on them, Common Sense Media just published a recommendation for, which I strongly support and endorse, for no child under 18 should be using any of those platforms. I think they are not stable enough, and we have still too many questions for children to be, using those machines that are mimicking human relationships. So if you are a parent of a teen, I would strongly encourage you to maybe ask and be curious about your teenager using any of those platforms, but I would be very vigilant as parents if your child is doing so. So let me speak about one study that we did on Replika.ai at Stanford last year. What we found is people who use Replika.ai are more lonely than average, so very much on the theme of those machine relationships are filling a void. This is absolutely true from research. Number two, 90% of people who are using Replika.ai believe that interactions are human-like. So we are very confused as humans about those machines and what they report back to us. So there's the concern about our children using some of those platforms. There seems to be a slight benefit in mental health in using Replika.ai based on our research, but I would also be very careful about extending those conclusions to any platform. It's not certain that it can be replicated. And then last but not least, there seems to be a slight displacement in human relationships as a result of using those platforms. So more lonely people are using them, and they are becoming lonelier as a result of using them from a human perspective. Similarly, MIT and OpenAI have done some research and found that while it's a small subset of ChatGPT users, there is a portion of people who are becoming emotionally engaged with ChatGPT in a quite intense way, and that the daily usage of ChatGPT correlates with increased loneliness and dependence. So what is clear out of all of this is two, I think, very important themes. One is that if we think back about the science of relationships, that it's not more flashcards that our children need, or it's not learning math earlier that really matters. What really matters for brain development and for all these good things that I outlined earlier is love. And the second thing that's really clear is that we are at a defining, that the defining really challenge of our time is to increase our relationships around us. So we need what I call the relationship revolution, or if you allow me for a little play on word here, a revolution in our societies. And to me, we to change this paradigm, we need to address all those circles of relationships where our children are. And it's a complicated topic because these relationships are around many multiple circles, starting with families, of course, but also schools, peers and play, and then communities. So if you allow me to maybe dream with all of you tonight, what if we were to rethink family time as relational time, and that has a lot of implications about how families are supported, for example, including family hub and other things, but also things that may be a little bit more under our control about how technology and how each one of us uses technology. But what if relationships were becoming, what if we were also to reinvent, in addition to families, what if we were to think about schools as relational hubs? And what if we were to train educators not only in instruction, but in connection? What if we were to change assessment, which are driving so much of our behaviors in our society and in our education systems, not just for literacy and academic success and numeracy, but also measuring the strength of connection in a classroom around our children? What if we were to focus a lot more on play and relationships around our little ones, for our young children to have more friends, because free play drives more friendships. And friendship is actually a great predictor of long-term academic success. What if we were to rethink how our communities are built to be a lot more relationship-centered, especially from an intergenerational perspective? And here I highlighted a few programs that I love, including this program in South LA called Gen Exchange, that leverages community members to come in elementary classrooms and support young children with reading. Some beautiful examples here. But what if we were to do this more at scale, thinking a lot more about how can we insert and have relationships around our children everywhere? So this is my last slide, but I wanted to, end with maybe a call to action. To make relationships visible again. This is a very, very easy to understand, but tough to apply every day. But because we need those relationships for all our children and for all of us adults as well to thrive. And what I call here RQ, which stands for relational intelligence. I would love for all of us to not only think about human intelligence as cognitive and IQ or emotional intelligence, which is EQ, but really think increasingly about this other form that is rising, I believe, in our societies of relational intelligence, or what I call here RQ. Because RQ will really be our humanity superpower. And so that's about my book, Love to Learn. And the title is Love to Learn, but really, and I will leave this with all of you as a thought, I believe that to love to learn, we must first learn to love. And that's really my big call to action for all of us. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Isabel Howe. That was so beautiful. You know, those of you who are on tonight know that co-founder Bev Hartman and I have both been longtime educators, especially in early childhood. And what you're saying, Isabel, makes so much sense. The reason I do this work now to educate parents is because of the time I spent with young children. So I learned that parenting can be transformational, just like good teaching can be transformational, but you have nailed it. It's the relationships, right? That's what drives us. So we have some really good questions. Thank you, everybody coming in. But I want to start just by asking you, why are early relationships so critical to child's brain development and lifelong learning? What is it?
The early part or the relationship part of both, Charlene? The early part?
I think the early part. So why
Yeah,
are relationships so critical for brain development?
yeah. So if we think about this idea that we are born essentially with this, with all these neurons, but these neurons, for all of us humans to be able to learn, need to be shaped. They need to be connected. And the way we connect those neurons is through relationships. So that's why our brains grow so much, those synaptic connections occur at such incredible rates of 1 million per second, synaptic connection being formed in the earliest years of life, because these neurons are not connected when we are born, which, by the way, is different from other animal species. So other animal species are born with already some synaptic connection being formed, which is why some other animals are able to feed themselves or are able to walk, as soon as they are born, and we are not as humans. We need to learn all of this, and it's a beautiful thing about humans that is actually part of our uh, ability to have superior intelligence to a lot of other animal species, because that period of formation allows us to become more independent and more creative thinkers as relative to other species. But the key point is that when we are born as humans, as baby humans, we need those human relationships to be able to learn, and those initial periods of life are essential for all this critical period of learning.
Thank you for that. That really makes sense, Isabel. I mean, I remember when cell phones first came in and I would watch parents walking with their babies, right? On the phone. And I would think, well, it's going to be really hard for a baby to compete with that phone. And I think the research bears that out, right? They need you, a parent, a caregiver, a grandparent, to talk with them about how they're experiencing life for those messages to get encoded. Yes?
Yes. Um, so the reality is that what the research shows is that, and which is a good news, by the way, for all of us parents, is that the research shows that we don't need to be perfect. So we don't need to be 100% in connection all the time with our babies. This is almost like this would not be practical. And by the way, research shows that doesn't really matter. What matters is that it is about quality, not quantity. and also that the other really critical piece is that we are not being too, what my researcher colleagues are calling a technoference, which is the impact of technology on your point, Charlene, that first there is not too many of those disconnections in relationships, but when those disconnections happen, that there is a beautiful repair of those disconnections. So the repair piece is probably the most important piece in reconnecting to a child. So let me be a little bit more practical. If we get interrupted by a phone call or by a text message or by a, I don't know, notification, you know, pick one of those, or by another adult, this is fine. This will happen. What matters is going back into that relationship in a way where we are deeply present and where we are able as adults to come back to that child and ignore any impact on our feelings that maybe this notification from a colleague may have triggered in all of us adults. So it's sometimes tricky, but that's really important. The important piece, as far as research is concerned, is both the so again, quality, not quantity, and number two, the repair piece once a relationship has been disconnected.
Okay, so hear that, parents. You don't have to be perfect, but if something goes off the rails, admitting it and even saying to your child, I'm so sorry. I wish I hadn't spoken to you that way. Let's try again. As Isabelle is saying, you can reset, and we recommend it.
Exactly. So there's this very famous very, very famous study that maybe some of you have seen, and if you haven't, I would strongly encourage you, but you can look at it online very easily through those very, very interesting videos called the still face experiment.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, Charlene, what I mean, when I speak about, what I refer to. So this is this experiment that was done now several decades ago, where a child is with their mother, and then mother turns their head or is distracted, and then you observe that the child starts expressing some distress, and then starts crying or fussing around because he or she is looking for the attention of their caregiver. Okay. What the research has shown is that it's okay for the child to be a little fussy or even cry for a moment. What matters is for the parent or the adult caregiver to reconnect with that child after that disconnection.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And we don't want the child to give up and stop trying to communicate.
that's right. That's right.
Oh, I know that study broke my heart when I was 18. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Isabelle, you talked about relational tech. One of our audience members is asking, can you give us some examples of relational tech and specific apps that do qualify as positive?
Yeah. So let me pick on one that many of us use, which is FaceTime. FaceTime with grandma is an amazing thing. It's an amazing, simple example of relational tech. That's one way to use technology to connect a child with an older adult. Amazing, amazing way to use technology. There are some more fancy use of relational tech. For example, we have a big project at Stanford University called the Autism Project, which is one of my favorite projects here, which is for children on the autism spectrum. That's a set of glasses that children can wear that are powered by computer vision AI technologies that allows for detecting the emotion of a person across from that child. So for a child on the autism spectrum that generally have very, very big challenges detecting emotions, that can be quite life transforming. And so that's another example, that's more fanciful example of technology that can be relational, deeply relational, because it enhances connection with other humans.
Okay, I get it. Thank you. As a new grandparent, I love that. I don't mind if they eat dinner or breathe. I just like seeing those kids on the screen. Okay, here's a really good question. The writer asks, you talked about the impact of relationships on babies, brain size and MRI activity. Does that impact continue in teenagerhood, or is it just important in babyhood and toddlerhood?
Yeah, so I showed one of the short answer is it matters across the lifespan. It matters not only in teenage years, and one of the studies that I showed was for high schoolers. So clearly it continues to matter in teenager years. There is also a very famous study on the program that maybe many of you would recognize called Big Brothers, Big Sisters.
Mhm.
Um, that showed the importance of having at least one mentor in a child's life, having a huge impact on teenagers, especially in that study. Actually, there was one really interesting conclusion, which is that 6 months in that relationship seems to be a turning point in the benefits. So, meaning that um, it takes a little while, and we all know this intuitively, but it takes a little while for any one of us to trust and establish a meaningful relationship with another human. So it seems like the study from Big Brothers Big Sisters suggests that it's at around 6 month mark that we can observe those meaningful benefits from a mentor relationship on teenagers. Um, but it also applies to later life. This study that I mentioned from the Harvard Development, very famous study on Harvard Development, which tracked people throughout their life. Uh, they started with a group of Harvard students and tracked them throughout their life, and then they expanded the group of people that they were tracking longitudinally. That particular study showed that for older adults, if you have a few close friends, you live longer and you're happier. So there are like all these, huge benefits of relationships that seem to be materializing across the lifespan.
So, Isabel, I'm here like you, close to Stanford, but I'd like to see parents do less fighting about whether they have honors biology in ninth grade. What are some immediate suggestions, changes parents can make to strengthen relationships with their children to support the kind of lifelong learning you're talking about? What do we need to do more of or better?
Yeah. So one of the big things is this switch from family time into relational time. So what it means concretely, Charlene, is ensuring that we are a lot more present at certain points of time with our children. What concretely, it means ensuring that we have moments in our week or in our days where we are spending time away from any devices with our children, loving them. So it could be for many families, it's dinner time. Certainly, it is for mine. We love having dinners together. Another moment for my family that we really enjoy a lot is I'm going to laugh at this one, Charlene, is we have every Sunday, we have what we call disco night. Uh,
Do
so
you?
it's yeah, so it's a few minutes. It doesn't need to be really long. It's a few minutes every Sunday, and we dance like crazy in my household. We blast some music, some disco music, let's be specific. And we dance. And anyone who is in my household is invited, not only invited, is mandated to dance. And the crazier, the better. Anyway, that's our way to obviously relax, but also be joyful, be present with others. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be fancy. Um, every family has their own little, disco moment, I'm sure. But those are what I mean. That's what I mean by relational time, is those moments of connection with each other that are ideally routines as well as very special moments of yeah, being playful. Thank you, Bev. I was going to use the word joyful. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. That's wonderful. Parents, again, these little traditions, whether it's Friday pizza night or you play balloons with your kids on Saturday, I don't care. But as Isabel is saying, they matter and they matter to the kids and it's what they remember. And those are really important. All right, Isabel, I know we've reached the end of our hour. Oh, there's so many wonderful questions. I wish I could interview you for another hour, but I'm going to end with this question because I think it's really just a good one. You call this book hope filled. So, what gives you the most hope when it comes to the future of early education and parenting?
What gives me a lot of hope, Charlene, is that every single parent that I ever met loves their child and wants to do the right things. And every educator that I've ever met is relational and stays in the profession because they are relational. So the combination of the two, parents who love their children and educators that are deeply relational gives me a lot of hope. Um, we can do this. We can make relationships visible.
We can. And parents, this is something we can control with our children and our families, right? We can build better relationships. Isabel Howe, it has been such a pleasure. Everybody, this book is so wonderful. Whether you're an early childhood person or not, it opens your eyes to the kinds of ways that we can better relate and become better parents. So again, thank you, Isabel Howe, and to all of you who are on with us today. Wish we could have answered all of the questions, but yes, joyful, playful. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Take care. Isabel Howe, thank you. I hope we see you again soon. And good night for now, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Charlene.
Lots of love. We hope you're feeling it, Isabel.
I can see the little heart emojis here.
That's
Thank you,
right. That's
everyone.
right. Okay, take care.
Bye bye.
Good night.